series based around Rebirth Superman starring Jon Kent and Damian Wayne, both in their Super Sons iteration, but with adventures that harken back to the Silver Age. It sounds like it could have been a great time, but sadly is among the list of adaptations and pitches that never happened. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and we're going to take a look at the Superman family cartoon, Superfamily cartoon, that never happened. Superman debuted in Action Comics #1 back in 1938, and after some time trailing behind Captain Marvel, aka the Big Red Cheese, aka in the modern age Shazam, Superman would become the top superhero of the Golden Age. Over time, his cast of characters and mythos would grow around him, and that would include the concept of a super family, a series of regular supports who could be seen in his adventures, an idea that was greatly impacted by the arrival of Otto Binder, who had worked at Fawcett Comics developing many concepts for Captain Marvel that would then find themselves grafted onto Superman. Those two do share some fascinating overlap. It's very fitting that comics and adaptations have them fight so often. Harkens back to their lawsuit days. Superman's family would include the likes of his cousin, Kara, Supergirl, his childhood dog, Krypto, but also in his case it would include his long-standing supports, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen. Family meaning more the group of characters with which the Man of Steel was heavily associated and close to in canon rather than necessarily blood relation. Indeed, Superman's supporting cast would prove to have a staying power all its own. Buoyed by the Adventures of Superman adaptation from the 1950s, the character of Jimmy Olsen would really be forged and explode. And in comics, he would eventually be given his own solo series, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, which debuted in 1954 and ran until 1974. The series proved to be a hit and would launch a sequel series, Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, in 1958, a series we regularly visit on this channel. Last time we took a look, time of recording, Lois had taken a hiatus from her job so that she could work at a diner and cook food in the hopes that maybe Superman would eat it. Will Superman taste her cooking? It was a good time. I'll leave the link down below. That series would also run until 1974. That year would see the cancellation of both books, along with Supergirl's short-lived 70s series, helmed mostly by Carrie Bates, which we did a video on. It was a lot of Supergirl worrying about dates, and all of these characters and more would be rolled into the book Superman Family, an anthology-style book which would start off at issue 164, since it took its numbering from the longest-running canceled series at that point, which was Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. So it just jumped on. It's good marketing, because if you were walking by the stand, you'd be like, what? There were 164 issues of this? The Superman Family comic would run until 1982, and would vary a little in format. At first, it would be new adventures for the rolled-in characters of Lois, Jimmy, and Supergirl, but it would eventually transition from issue 182 onward, with a new cover format and even more stories rotating through. You would have things like Mr. and Mrs. Superman, you would have Nightwing and Flamebird, adventures from within the bottle city of Kandor, and the list would go on. By the mid-80s, DC would reboot its entire universe with Crisis on Infinite Earths. This in 1985, and it would see the crushing of the multiverse and everything streamlined into one canon. They would do a bunch of retooling, retconning, reboots, all of that rolled into the same thing. And one of the things that would happen there would be the streamlining of Superman. His supports cut right down for his relaunch. The idea being there were too many characters. He was supposed to be the last son of Krypton, there are Kryptonians everywhere, huge supports, convoluted, just streamline it back to basics, relaunch, big sales, that kind of thing. And for a time, the idea of a Superman family was far from most people's minds, but that did not last. Over the years, his supports would creep back in and rise up once more. Supergirl would reappear in multiple ways. A new Superboy would rise, now that in the new timeline, Clark hadn't been Superboy as a child. Superman and Lois would get married in the 90s. 2012 would see a kidified version of the Superfamily comic in the Superman Family Adventures. But by far the biggest move creating a Superfamily dynamic in the traditional sense came in 2016, or rather a little bit before it, just leading up into the Rebirth era at DC Comics. And that was in Convergence. Convergence was an event wherein essentially every defunct or displaced or lost timeline due to the New 52 was revisited and given some form of closure, or at least that was the intent. In that event, one got to see pre-New 52 Superman, so post-Crisis Superman, the one that many would consider classic Superman, although many of those traits were actually developed post-Crisis and didn't really appear before. Golden and Silver Age Superman are very different beasts, and even the Bronze Age Superman is different than the post-Crisis one. In this Convergence story, Superman and Lois would have a child, Jon Kent, and with the 2015 to 2016 series, Superman, Lois, and Clark, an 8-issue mini, this version of Superman and his family would be reintroduced into DC continuity, displacing and supplanting the New 52 version of Superman. This would lead into the Rebirth era and, of course, the Super Sons comic, which would be the adventures of Batman and Superman's sons, Damian Wayne and Jon Kent together, having all kinds of adventures, which also harkened back to the Bronze Age set of those stories, because there were Super Sons back in that era, but they were different. They were like Clark Jr. and Bruce Wayne Jr. They were computer simulations. It was a time. There were also a couple of Silver Age stories that led up to that. It was a good time. We did a video on that. I'll link that too. This Super Sons period holds a soft spot in the hearts of many fans, and many fell in love involved with this period of Superman as a dad to a young son. And apparently Vinton Heck was one of those people. He had done much animation on comics work, and that would include for animated series Young Justice, which is where he describes his idea for the Superfamily series fully coming into being around the 3rd season of Young Justice. He describes it as follows. It's a long quote, so get comfy, but not too comfy. It's not that long. I came up with it while directing on season 3 of Young Justice. I drew some pitch art that was basically an animation-friendly version of Superman Rebirth with John, aka Superboy, front and center. My angle was to combine these new storylines with a lighter tone inspired by all those crazy Silver Age stories I read as a young lad. Seeing, for instance, how John and his mom Lois would deal with his dad being turned into a super merman was something I dearly wanted to see. There are so many dark, adult-themed DC stories, I felt the company needed something that got back to its roots and was made for kids. I think we actually covered a Silver Age story where Superman became a mermaid. We definitely covered his mermaid ex-girlfriend Lori Lemaris, and we also definitely covered the time that Batman became a merman. The Silver Age was a glorious time of body horror-esque things being treated as fun, whimsical fantasy. It was also a time of giving pretty much any story a shot. If you didn't get your story through in the Silver Age, I have some questions. How boring, bad, or continuity breaking was it? Now, this pitch for this series occurred around 2018, and the series didn't get picked up. We have more quotes. The people at Warner Brothers Animation liked it and had me try out a bunch of talented artists to help design the look of it, and settled on Sean Galloway for me to pair off with and develop the final pitch for DC. Unfortunately, they passed, but I'm hopeful the success of Shazam will help open the door for more fun, kid-friendly stories. Success of the first Shazam aside, this did not lead to this particular series being picked up, and the direction that DC Projects is going in is still being figured out. And time of recording mid-2023, the next direct-to-consumer animated release is using the fact that it's rated R as part of its promotion.
Where on Earth are we?
Not Earth. War World.
And the next Superman animated series has been trapped in limbo for quite some time, and appears to be moving in a looser direction adaptation-wise, though it does seem to have a lighthearted tone.
You think he's a plane?
It kinda looks like a bird.
2022 did see the release of a Supersons project that we did a video on, and it was a solid intro to the Supersons dynamic. Nothing revolutionary, but a fun, well-constructed outing that at times had some dark imagery. However, this project that wasn't sounds like it had the potential to be a lot of fun, and potentially have some cross-generational appeal, what with the Silver Age story element. The concept design shows some love for that classic era with imitating the framing covers that they used to have. It was also said that Keenan was going to be in the mix, and Crypto, and a bunch of other characters. There are some details around that too. I have another quote. Quotes for days for this one. Yeah, this was pretty fleshed out by the time it got shot down. I love the characters I grew up with, like Mxyzptlk and Steel, and they were envisioned as their classic comic book counterparts. Damian Wayne was a natural choice based on the chemistry he has with John in their comic book adventures, the Supersons. The female Steel is also an established character from the comics named Natasha. She is Steel's niece, and I thought it would be cool to see her having adventures with John as a slightly older female protagonist. It was also important to bring diversity to my project to reflect the world we live in and reach out to a wider audience. That is also why I included Kong Keenan. He's a relatively new character, but I love the idea of China having its own Superman. I can feel some clenching at that quote. The world we live in today has become a bit of a hot button phrase because the way that's implemented sometimes does not always go the best. It's about execution. However, to me, it sounds like if executed well, it had potential. They had many directions to go in, many characters to draw upon. The idea of bringing in other characters would be very true to the classic Superfamily dynamic in terms of the comic, and there were just so many choices adventure-wise if you're going to play with the Silver Age. The Silver Age is often dismissed as nothing but zany and silly, and the structure and creativity of some of the stories can at times be dismissed or brought forward only for darker, edgier reimaginings. But it has a lot of avenues and possibilities to be explored seriously and treated with reverence while not losing some of that original fun atmosphere. You just gotta examine it, the good and the bad. Now that's of course assuming this would be handled well. It would of course have the potential to be disjointed, messy, preachy, or veer into that over-the-top area that some things do when they try and emulate the Silver Age. Or perhaps it could just have gotten too silly or disconnected from how Superman and his family are perceived in the 2020s, or at the time, the late 2010s. It's very difficult to emulate the tone of the Silver Age accurately. That's why it's so impressive when it's done well. We're just in a different time period, different mindset, so it's very difficult to create an authentic version of it, or something that feels like it's coming from that place of at least attempting to be authentic. There of course have been and will continue to be attempts, and when handled poorly, they can vary from wildly off the mark to potentially insulting or both. Joker, The Man Who Stopped Laughing series backup stories. Although since the Silver Age isn't often reread, when these attempts aren't necessarily the best, it can go unnoticed, and even lackluster attempts can be given a green light if enough of those elements are noted / recognized, regardless of the implementation. Time of recording, there is a renewed emphasis on the Superfamily and the Action Comic stories of the dawn of DC, which began in 2023, so there is still seemingly an interest in such an idea. While it did fall through, Sean Galloway, who ultimately designed the character concept, stated, "I'm extremely grateful to super talented Vind & Hook for the opportunity to be the one of the participants to partake in the character design test for his pitch last year to Warner Brothers. Thank you for the guidance and pushing me to keep barreling past my comfort zone. As a fan of DC Comics and Warner Brothers animation, this has been a dream come true." Do you think a show like this would have been fun? Is it something you would have watched? Is the world missing out by not mining the Silver Age more often? If you were to do a series inspired by the Silver Age, what would it be? If you've been here a while, you know mine. Updated Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane. Keep the shenanigans, but more romance. I need to work on the pitch, clearly. So that was the Superfamily show that wasn't. Share your thoughts down below. And while you're down there, please do all YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Let me know your favorite era of Superman. Why not? More questions. Thanks so much for taking some time today to spend discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it. I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.